Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very excited to welcome you to the first webinar on the World Energy Council on hydropower. My name is Hans-Wilhelm Schiffer and I'm the Executive Chair of the World Energy Resources Studies. The aim of this event is to bring together our study group members and member committees to discuss the latest developments in hydropower industry and learn about best practices from industry experts. We would also like our member committees to use this information and present it at your own meetings and events so that it benefits you and your membership. With me is Zolandi van der Westhuizen, Deputy Director for Scenarios and Resources, who took the initiative to start this webinar series and is the driving force behind it. In a minute, she will indicate briefly the opportunities and challenges. We are very honored and happy to have Bill Gerling, Director for Hydropower Developing at the International Hydropower Association, as our expert speaker that will bring additional insights by relating own project experience, challenges, and key lessons learned. With that short introduction, I would like to welcome all of you, our member committees, resources study group members, future energy leaders, and other guests. As you are aware of, the World Energy Council is a principal impartial network of energy leaders and experts promoting an affordable, stable, and environmentally sensitive energy system for the greatest benefit of all. It is the UN-accredited global energy body representing the entire energy spectrum with member organizations in over 90 countries. Further details are at www.world.worldenergy.org. With this short introduction, I would like to take over to Zolandi.
Thank you, Hans. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. And thank you so much for joining this webinar on hydropower. Before we start, just some quick housekeeping rules. Attendees are muted just because it will cause havoc if everybody can talk at the same time. However, if you do have any questions or comments, please look on the left-hand side of your screen and there you will see a list of participants. Please find questions and comments and next to it the dialog box, and then you can type in your question or your comment in the box and send it to us. If you have any technical issues, please look for the name Sam Porter and send him also on the dialog box your issue, and he will try and help you as much as possible. If you cannot see the dialog box and your screen is completely black, then on the top left-hand corner you will see the circle with participant. Click on the circle and then the panel will appear and you will see the list of names. Hydropower is really unique in the sense that it is a renewable energy. It provides storage and it is also base load. I'm just going to run through some key findings of the resources report that we released last year. With hydropower being responsible for 71% of all renewable electricity supply, it is the leading renewable source. It reached 1,246 gigawatts of installed capacity in 2016 and accounted for 16.4% of the world's electricity generated from all sources. Most of the new developments are concentrated in China, which account for about 27% of global installed capacities, and other key areas are the States, Brazil, and Canada. Asia then has the largest unutilized potential, estimated at about 7,000 roughly 200 per terawatt hours per year, making it a very likely leading market for future development. We also see a lot of potential still in Latin America and Africa. There are also a couple of exciting technological innovations and developments, like an increase in the scale of turbines. Up to 1,000 megawatt turbine is in development, and also on the other hand, the standardization of a much smaller 100 megawatt run of robot turbine. We also have advanced hydropower control technologies and software that enable renewable hybrids. Both conventional and pumped storage hydropower is increasingly utilized as a flexible resource for balancing variable renewable resources, and we see this particularly in European countries. Our guest from IHA will tell us a bit more about advances in sustainable development practices in using the Hydropower Sustainability Assessment Protocol. Hydro also gives greater consideration of water management benefits like flood control, water conservation during droughts and arid seasons. With the increased growth in hydropower development, we might find a shortage of technical specialists such as experienced engineers and sustainability specialists. By means of an introduction, obviously hydropower, like a lot of other projects, are very strongly site-specific, and each project will differ in its impacts, the positive and the negative, depending on issues such as the size, the type, the geography, the surrounding land use, and the environment. Some of the drivers are adaptation solution, climate change mitigation, flexibility of generation, energy storage, higher demand for electricity, fresh water management, and the benefits that we see from hydropower is clean energy, economic development, facilitates regional cooperation, water services, and energy security. Just a quick overview of some numbers. Hydropower supplies 16.4% of global power supply. It constitutes 71% of all renewable energy. There's still roughly 10,000 terawatt hours per year of undeveloped potential. And then at the moment, it provides about 95% of storage, and that is mostly in the form of pumped storage. When we look at the role of hydropower in the energy mix, we see that it's a low-cost base power. It's reliable generation into the energy mix. It provides peaking power, like we said before, energy storage, and then there's a great synergy between the hydro storage capability and non-flexible renewable energy resources, and this is really gaining a lot of prominence in the last couple of years. And then we have pumped storage ancillary services. There are also some other benefits like black start capability, frequency regulation, inertial response, spinning or non-spinning reserve, and voltage support. Looking at some of the opportunities and benefits on a national level, hydropower can assist in attracting energy-intensive industries, and especially because it's renewable energy, it could then catalyze domestic demand for hydropower, and this serves as a basis for investment. For example, in Iceland, the hydropower was developed to attract and build a domestic aluminium industry. Looking at some of the benefits and opportunities on a regional level, we have cross-border power trade, and in some projects it is actually required as part of the business case. Countries can export clean electricity to neighbors, which could provide opportunities for substantial investment and revenues. Here we have the example of Georgia that is already exporting electricity to Turkey, where average wholesale prices in each country are between 43 and 85 US cents per kilowatt hour. Bilateral interconnectors may also be the key to growth in more developed markets. Some hydro-rich provinces that exceed production used for local demand can form bilateral contracts with a neighboring country to push forward the project expansion. With high voltage transmission lines, countries with abundant power resources use their reservoirs as batteries to balance the variable generation in neighboring countries. And an example is the Norwegian grid that is connected by underwater cables to Denmark, which enables Denmark to use Norwegian hydropower to back up its wind and thermal grid. Hydropower also provides flood management and drought protection through the use of the storage component of a reservoir, which is the reason the Three Gorges Dam was built. We've also seen hydropower being used successfully in Latin American countries, especially where they suffer the effects of El Nino and other climate change impacts, and it therefore adds some resilience to the region. The increasing demand for clean, reliable and affordable electricity provides great opportunities for the development of hydropower, while regulation that encourages clean energy investment will support this drive. Examples where companies were the investors are Facebook, that opened a data center in Luleå, Sweden, using hydropower, and BMW, that based its choice of site for its manufacturing facility for carbon fiber materials for electric vehicles on cheap hydroelectricity in Washington. As the energy mix of countries and regions continue to evolve, the need for more energy storage and dynamic capacity to balance grids will increase. In fact, grid penetration of renewables will depend on it. Hydropower is really in a unique position in that it is a proven technology with good synergies with all generation technologies, and its role is expected to increase. One of the biggest challenges with energy projects today is social and environmental resistance, and we see this across all technologies on a global level. People do not want to see wind turbines or solar panels or power stations, and the resistance is of course bigger with bigger scale projects. Which brings me to my next slide, which is why multi-purpose dams are such an important opportunity for hydropower developments. Depending on local circumstances and environment, dams can be used for irrigation, flood control, water supply, fish breeding, and recreation. As you can see on the charts on the right, the majority of dams are still single purpose, but dams are able to accommodate additional options retrospectively, especially in emerging economies by establishing new agricultural practices, businesses, and tourist attractions. It can become a source of income for local communities and thereby also contribute to the economic sustainability of those communities. That means hydropower is in such a setup contributes to the energy, water, and food security. Of course, everything is not a bed of roses, and like all other energy resources, there are some challenges that include sector knowledge and human resources, project delays, but that is not unique to hydro. We see it with most big projects across industries. Water consumption versus water use. Hydro uses water, it does not consume it, but is often reported as consumption, and this puts hydro in a negative light. Then also sedimentation, greenhouse gas footprint, climate change and resilience, and resettlement of local communities. These challenges are more focused on dams, and although to a much lesser extent, run-of-river projects also face challenges, especially with fish populations, stream diversion reach, which could impact irrigation, and with the lack of a reservoir and climate change effect, the availability of water is not always guaranteed. But the good thing is hydropower has been for a very long time, and the industry is continuously working to mitigate its impact on the environment and improve technology. With that, I would like to now hand over to our guest speaker from the International Hydro Association, Bill Gerling, to share some of his insights with us.
Thank you, Zulandi. Very pleased to join this webinar. We are very actively participating in World Energy Council's program, and we're hopefully going to be able to bring you some perspectives from IHA on the hydropower sector. I'll just introduce the International Hydropower Association to those of you who may not know the organization well. We're a non-profit mutual association established to advance sustainable hydropower. We have members and partners active in over 100 countries, and we follow 4 main strategic objectives around which our work program is focused, and that's advancing policies and strategies for the hydropower sector, building a vibrant community, creating a platform for knowledge, and delivering value to members. The work program that IHA is involved with has 10 major topics, 9 of which are in the hydropower development group, and 1 is under the sustainability group. Those are climate resilience and adaptation, clean energy systems, operations and maintenance and safety, sediment management, regional development and regional interconnections, water footprint, hydropower development, benefits, hydropower benefits, greenhouse gas reporting, project finance and investment, and the last topic is sustainability assessment that goes with the sustainability program. We have a number of different deliverable products that come out of the work program. Those include online articles and case studies, briefings, concept notes, good practice guidelines, and knowledge networks, as well as we put on a number of webinars and workshops throughout the year. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Zulandi, and we'll start a series of questions.
Great, thank you for that, Bill. When we talk about renewables, the first things people think of are solar and wind, and hydropower is often forgotten or not even considered as renewable energy. But what role will hydropower play in terms of working together with other forms of renewable energy, such as the wind power and solar?
Okay, thank you. We certainly promote that hydropower is a clean, renewable source of energy. We would argue it is the largest form of clean, renewable energy that's in existence and has been in existence for many, many decades. The role that hydropower has traditionally played is changing. Where it used to be the most reliable source of clean, renewable energy for baseload generation and to fulfill peaking generation requirements as well, it is now expanding and evolving to meet the growing need for energy storage due to the rapid growth in variable renewable technologies, as well as meeting global targets for clean renewable energy under the Paris Agreement. So these are new and evolving roles that hydropower will continue to play, and it's going to have a very, very important role in meeting those energy storage requirements, especially with the amount of growth of wind and solar that's taking place now.
Okay, well, talking about the growth, we read a lot about the new solar applications, new development with wind and tidal energy, but what is the next step in the technological advancement of hydropower?
Well, one word we're hearing a lot of is digitization. One of our major partners is GE and another is Voith. Both of them are very heavily entrenched in what they're capturing as digitization. That involves digitization of not just operations and maintenance, but digitization as it applies to energy storage technology and hybrid systems working together. Just to articulate on that a little bit more, there are a lot of organizations working on the simulation and optimization models to better encompass energy economic aspects, taking into account that the variable nature of wind and solar in particular are creating some challenges in the marketplace, and digitization will play a role in terms of linking hydropower systems, which are easily dispatchable and very flexible, together with these variable technologies in a way that will allow these systems to work together. And as we mentioned just briefly before, what is now becoming a new buzzword is hybrid systems. These are systems where hydropower and other renewable variable renewable technologies such as wind, solar, and others are being actually designed and operated together. So we'll see things like, I'll show on my next slide, where we have floating solar PV panels are quite a new technology where solar photovoltaic panels are installed on existing reservoirs. We see an example here on the Balbina Dam in Brazil. And these are taking advantage of the aspects of hydropower reservoirs to enable the installation of solar panels, which creates a win-win situation in that you can now generate another source of energy in the same footprint. It actually makes the solar panels work more efficiently because they are cooled by the water reservoir, and it also takes advantage of the fact that the existing reservoir is in place. It does not have to be built. And in addition, it can, in some cases, actually reduce evaporation on these existing reservoirs. So these are starting to show up in all kinds of different places in many different regions. There's a lot of this going on in India right now, as you can see this example on an irrigation canal. It's a brilliant way of taking advantage of two technologies. And there are a number of other examples that we can state about where the sector is going in terms of advancing digitization and technology to enable renewables to work together more successfully. Pumped hydropower storage is still the largest form of energy storage in the world. 95% of the energy, of the electricity storage is provided currently by pumped hydropower storage. But there are now projects being built that are taking advantage of these synergies where there can be systems planned together to work more effectively together. There's an example shown in Germany of the Ronghausen pumped hydropower storage plant. And just a note on that slide, a remarkable statistic is China aims to reach 40 gigawatts of pumped hydropower storage capacity by 2020 to balance their massive growth in solar and wind. And this is necessary because in China right now, they are actually having to curtail wind because they don't have enough energy storage to support it. So I'll leave that thought there.
Great, that is really exciting developments. Speaking of developing countries, China, when I was at Eskom in South Africa, we were involved in the Inga project, and there were great hopes placed on the Inga project. It was also in the pipeline for many years, but to date there was only limited development that took place. Which brings me to the question of the type of political challenges that need to be addressed to secure regional hydropower in developing countries.
Okay, well, the topic of regional interconnections and regional development is first and foremost at IHA. We just came off of a very, very successful World Hydropower Congress. A large component of that Congress was centered on regional interconnections, long distance transmission, and the importance of developing these interconnections to ensure that countries can have access to clean renewable energy, in particular hydropower. To address some of these challenges that are facing the development of hydropower projects that involve transboundary rivers, project developers and funding agencies will have to work very closely with host governments responsible for water and energy planning to demonstrate that properly planned projects will contribute to meeting some of the sustainable development goals, in particular food security, water security, energy security, and combating climate change. All of these are basic principles of how hydropower and interconnections work to bring economic development and in particular, in some cases, water supply and opportunity for employment to regions that have no electricity in some cases. So we're always in support of the work we get from some of our countries that we work with and some of the companies that are members of IHA. We did hear a lot from one of the co-organizers, GECO, who is a Chinese consortium spun off from the State Grid, who are basically taking the attitude that there is a possibility of having what they call a globally connected world, a world that is interconnected across all nations. And they're quite serious about this, and it is a lofty target, but it is something that will actually progress as time goes on. I'll just give some few examples of where interconnections exist that have been fundamental to the success of development in these countries. The Black Sea transmission line is one example. The Dagashu line, the 126 megawatt line in Bhutan, where now they can export power into India. There's developments going on in Laos for export to Thailand. Sarawak, which is one of our primary members in Malaysia, are involved in transmission lines to Indonesia. And where I come from in Canada, there's a transmission line that is going to be built between Minnesota and Manitoba to augment existing transmission lines, which will increase export opportunities and trade. So that in a nutshell is not necessarily answering your question, Zilandi, particularly about the political challenges, but why it's so important to impress upon the ministries responsible for energy planning to ensure that they understand that this is fundamental in some cases to their continued growth.
Yeah, and indeed the country's sustainability and also for the region.
Correct.
We also see that some investment and funding very clearly shifted to renewable projects. Will hydropower need to be adapted to help with the the changing climates?
Well, yes. This is at probably the very top of our list is developing climate resilience guidelines. We have seen, again, I'll go back to the Congress that we just had in Addis Ababa last week. We saw the topic of climate change and the challenges that climate change is bringing to the sector resounding through virtually every session that we had. There was not a single session where on any topic where it wasn't discussed. Climate change is influencing most of our major decisions around hydropower development, and building climate resilience into basin planning and project design will be a requirement to ensure projects are safe and resilient. So it's no longer really being considered as just something you have the option of considering. It is now becoming a requirement, particularly from the safety perspective. So another area that we discussed at the Congress where it's important for hydropower projects to be climate resilient is if for them to become eligible for green bonds and climate bonds, which is a financing instrument that is available, and there's trillions of dollars in this industry, but only projects that are considered the very cleanest and the very greenest will be eligible. And for that, they're going to have to demonstrate that resilience measures have been incorporated into the project. And I'm talking about things that ensure that, for instance, the facility can be operated under a more extreme climate variability, hydrologic variability than would have been traditionally considered. Dam safety measures are considering the possibility of a greater probable maximum flood, and so on. Another area that is very important to understand is that hydropower also plays a key role in providing adaptation services. So hydropower is also part of the solution through flood management and drought support for projects like we've seen at the Three Gorges Dam. Another area is maintaining and operating plants will require added guidance around greater variability and more climate extremes. So traditional operating rules have to adapt with the climate, and climate resilience guidelines are going to be needed to instruct and inform operators and the maintenance crews on what other considerations they have to consider for O&M. Dam safety guidelines I mentioned already, but is at the very, very top of this list, are already recognizing climate resilience in terms of flood design and emergency prepared and practice guidelines, but this has to be made more globally accessible. We heard from a lot of countries at the Congress that have no access to dam safety guidelines, and particularly guidelines that consider climate change and climate resilience. So this is one of the aspects of working together with World Bank on this project to produce climate resilience guidelines.
So one of the other environmental impacts, there are a couple, but what is the latest developments to reduce the impacts?
Well, I wouldn't say that the latest developments. IHA has for many, many years been supportive and part of the development of the sustainability protocol, the Hydropower Sustainability Assessment Protocol. Beginning back in 2000, after the World Commission on Dams final report, which was a very difficult time for the hydropower sector, the initial set of sustainability guidelines were drafted, and I believe it was around 2003 that they came out. And IHA was fundamental and instrumental part of developing those guidelines. It was really the foundation for how the organization started. And I think the initial first protocol assessment done by an accredited assessor was done around 2006. So it is continuing to grow, and the protocol is now firmly entrenched in the industry. We have quite a number of accredited assessors who came from IHA and are now working independent of IHA, but their job is to ensure that all of the aspects that are within the protocol, which are quite numerous and quite extensive, are met and scored, so that projects will be considered eligible for development and are capturing all of the key aspects of environmental impacts, and will pass their environmental impact assessment more readily. An example is the Kias project, where I came from in Manitoba, went through a protocol assessment, and it really did help when they did the full-blown environmental impact assessment of the project to ensure that it was covering all the bases. What is happening right now is there's an exercise going on in IHA to develop a more accessible and easier to use tool. The protocol assessment is quite a large exercise and quite an involved process and quite expensive. The intent is to create an easier to use tool that will be more applicable to the sector, and that work is ongoing right now.
Great. I suppose these kinds of protocols also, when you say it helps, that's mainly with funding and investment, or also in acceptability in communities?
Yes, of course. It's absolutely necessary in some regions because, as you mentioned earlier, there are some areas of the world that are averse to hydropower for one reason or the other, and the protocol is designed not only to score a project, but to ensure that the project is being built in the right place. And in some cases, it may find that there are situations where you may not want to develop there. Maybe it isn't a suitable location. Mm-hmm. And this is all part of building the protocol into pre-project planning to ensure that projects are built in the right place.
Okay. And are there any other opportunities that can benefit local communities?
Opportunities in terms of what?
In terms of what hydropower can provide.
Okay, so you're talking about the benefits of hydropower?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Again, as I mentioned, that's part of our work program. The hydropower benefits is on our list of topics. What we're really focusing on in our work topic is the quantification of hydropower benefits, because traditionally the industry is focused on the power-related benefits, those that are associated with the production energy and the value of that energy and what that brings to the community. But there are many other benefits that hydropower brings that are not quantified and often not discussed, such as the macroeconomic benefits that a hydropower project of any significant size can bring to a local region through employment and the associated infrastructure. The larger projects create massive employment opportunities. They create road systems. They create an entire infrastructure in some cases that will benefit the community for many, many years to come after that. In fact, I just came back from a study tour of the Gibi 3 project on the Omo River in Ethiopia. And they talked a lot about this at the project site, where it employed thousands and thousands of local people that had never had an opportunity to work before, and now will not only have access to electricity, but will have these added benefits of this project that brings a number of opportunities to their communities they never had before. And multipurpose reservoirs offer other benefits, such as what I had mentioned earlier, energy storage. Energy storage comes from both traditional forms of storage and from pumped hydropower storage, but traditional reservoirs can often add that element as well. A large component is flood control, flood attenuation, We see that in many regions where they had really no ability, no storage to manage floods in the past, where now they can through this reservoir. And at the other end of the scale, there's drought support. So when there's an extended drought and an extended dry period, a hydropower reservoir offers an additional, in some cases, years worth of storage that can be drawn on, managed appropriately, but can be drawn on to support that dry period. And then there are many other aspects such as irrigation, fisheries, recreation that are often offered by an appropriately sized and sited reservoir. And then the last one I will mention is the one I mentioned earlier, which is floating solar PV. So these are just some of the benefits of a hydropower project.
Yeah, it's really great to hear that it creates so many other opportunities for the local community, for small businesses, and when I think in developing countries, there's a great spirit of entrepreneurship, so they can really seize these opportunities to also get the community on a more sustainable level.
Yes, and that's why we're really trying to demonstrate that there are tangible, quantifiable benefits. The tricky part is to demonstrate to a ministry what in dollars some of those benefits will bring, because they're often very difficult to pin down in terms of the actual spin-off benefits.
Okay. My last question, because we're running out of time, and also before we move on to the questions from the listeners, one of the biggest issues and challenges around hydropower is the sediments. So what can be done, and what is being done to reduce the sedimentation?
Well, again, we featured this at our Congress, both in a workshop and in a focus session. In the minds of some who are experts in the field, this is the single most challenging issue to hydropower development, and certainly in certain countries like Nepal, it really is. This is a massive issue for them. And in terms of not just managing existing projects, but even finding suitable sites to develop projects that you can manage the sediment at. But what we're doing right now is another project with the World Bank to develop best practice guidelines, both under the guidance of IHA and World Bank, to ensure that both existing and planned projects have access to the very best sediment management techniques that are appropriate to the basin conditions and country-specific conditions that prevail. There are quite a number of different techniques now. I'm not an expert in sediment management, but the consultant we have working with us is very much an expert. And our proposal is that we're going to prepare a website that will show about 40 or 50 different case studies around the world where sediment management practices have been implemented using different techniques, including flushing through low-level dam outlets, removing sediments through hydrosuction, in some cases building bypass tunnels, venting through turbidity currents. There's just a variety of different techniques that are working, but they're not all applicable in every area, and they're not always economical. What you see on the slide is the Patrind project in Pakistan, where they have built a flushing tunnel, which on the left-hand side, I believe, where they actually draw the sediment out of the reservoir and flush it through a high-pressure tunnel. And this is the technique that was deemed appropriate and applicable there. So as I mentioned earlier, the guidelines that will come out will feature all of these case studies and the techniques, and we hope to have this website launched in the next 2 months, where our sector will have access to a variety of techniques and expertise on how to manage sediment.
Well, that sounds like a great database to have available. I'm going to move over to questions from the listeners. And the first one we have is, what can be done in local communities in Africa and Asia to encourage the development of hydropower?
Okay, it's a challenging question. Each local community in Africa that we spoke to at the Congress has its own set of challenges. In some cases it's political. In some cases it's a challenging hydrological environment that they're struggling with. In some cases it's just a lack of funding, and almost every case it's a lack of funding. What we're trying to introduce at IHA is something we call the Hydropower Preparation Support Facility. And the concept there is that with the support of organizations like African Development Bank and other funding agencies like World Bank, there has to be a pre-project planning fund available to these communities that they can use to do pre-project planning at a basin scale, and both at a project level and a basin scale level. And the concept is to ensure the appropriate level of pre-project financing goes into early stage preparation of projects to ensure that, again, the right projects are built in the right place. Too often what will happen if they are not provided with this level of pre-project financing is they will only embark on the smallest projects, which will not bring the benefits that the more appropriately sized project would have brought through reservoir development and some of the benefits we talked about earlier. Or they'll simply not have their homework done enough to even attract private investors at all. The concept here is this will ensure that private investors will be more liable to remove some of that front end risk and be more prepared to take on the project and see it through to completion. And the concept is that an appropriately planned and prepared project will pay back that call it a loan, but it's really just an upfront injection of money through the added benefits and the production energy that the project will produce over its life. So this is a concept we brought up again at the Congress, and we had quite a bit of interest in through African Development Bank. We've got some other organizations that are also interested in it. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development are also interested in this concept. So we hope that this is a means by which local communities can have access to the appropriate amount of funding to get these projects off the ground.
Okay, and would that also apply to, you mentioned smaller projects, but indeed smaller projects like run-of-river projects?
Absolutely. This isn't only targeted at large projects.
Okay.
It likely is a little more of a fit to a larger project because of the large capital that's involved in some of the very large projects. But run-of-the-river projects are also capital intensive. And involve proper planning and proper siting as well, to ensure that they are given the due consideration of where they should be built.
Okay.
So yes, the answer is yes.
Our next question is, what are the roles of governments in encouraging the development of hydropower as well as writing policies to help the growth of hydropower?
Well, we mentioned some of them already. Ensuring that it's up to the developers to understand the benefits that the hydropower project will bring to their local region, but it's also up to the government to bring that to the decision makers to ensure that they are developing appropriate policy for hydropower development in their country. We're starting to see that happen in India now. There's been a bit of a shift away from what they considered only doing small hydro in their country to now thinking a little more broadly in terms of what kind of hydropower can we develop when they have a massive amount of potential there to develop. So that's one side of it. Another side of it is to ensure that the services that hydropower provides are appropriately compensated. So this is particularly an issue in places like the EU, where there's really not that much more hydropower that can be developed, but they have opportunities for things like pumped hydropower storage. But the problem is that there's not an appropriate compensation for the services that hydro brings. I'm talking about some cases the ancillary services, the frequency control and the support that they bring to the transmission system, the balancing services they provide for intermittent renewables. Nowhere could it be more evident than in places like Germany, where they're starving for this type of balancing to avoid curtailing their variable renewables. So it's that, and it's also really goes further than that. For hydropower to be successful in some markets, there now has to be introduction of a carbon price to de-incentivize the development of thermal and to incentivize development of renewables. And that doesn't really exist yet. There's still not appropriate level of carbon pricing. In some cases, there's no carbon premium at all. It's happening slowly in North America, but not as aggressively as some would like it to. But it certainly is not happening in Europe. And right now, I think the subsidies for building some of the renewables is much higher than the carbon premium would have been. So they're ending up with, in some cases, a negative marginal price in Europe for that reason. So anyway, that's in a nutshell what I think is the role of governments.
Great, thank you. We are coming towards the end of our time available. I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you a final question, and that is, how do you personally see the future outlook for hydropower?
Well, there's no question there's going to be continued growth in the sector, particularly in developing countries. Certain countries are flattening out in terms of development. Canada in particular, there's been a bit of a flattening of development because a lot of the good sites have been developed already. But in places like Africa, where there's just an immense amount of opportunity, and India I mentioned earlier, and parts of Asia, there's just a gold mine of opportunity. But again, we have to be there to encourage them to have the right tools to be able to attract developers, attract private investors, and ensure that their energy plans have been considering all of the factors that need to be considered in doing an appropriate level of renewable investment. So hydropower, wind, and solar will continue to be developed together, but there has to be appropriate planning to ensure that they're done with an overall energy plan in place. And really to meet the Paris Agreement, the conditions under which the Paris Agreement was written, I know that hydropower will still have to be playing a major role.
Yeah, and you just reminded me, one of the big advantages of hydro is the long lifespan. I mean, we're looking at about 100 years for a lot of dams, isn't it?
Yes, that's pretty typical.
Yeah, and that long time frame is something that we don't hear in discussions with solar and wind. So in that way, it offers a longer term sustainability solution for countries.
Yes, and of course, hydropower is a clean and reliable resource that, other than hydrologic variability, it can be relied on 24/7.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we do not have time for more questions, but we would like to encourage you to send questions and comments to us so that we can keep an open dialogue between members and experts. Bill, thank you very much for your valuable perspective you shared with us. We would like to ask that you copy and paste the link on your screen. You should be able to see it to give us feedback on today's webinar. For those of you that were on the previous webinar, thank you very much for letting us know about the bug in the survey. It has now been fixed. The survey is really super short and will not take longer than 5 minutes, but we would really appreciate your feedback so that we can continue making improvements. We will make the recording and the slides from today available to all our member committees, our study group members, and the FALs. I would also like to remind you of our next webinar that will be on waste to energy, and that is on the 25th and the 27th of July. If you would like us to address any specific issue around waste to energy, please let us know. Then all that remains is to say thank you very much for joining us and have a great day.